Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you for everyone for sticking around to the final day and joining me for my talk. A big thanks to Rajam for the kind invitation to speak here. I'm incredibly excited to get the chance to share some of my work and other colleagues' work here in my presentation today. And what I wanted to talk about was targeting pain from many angles and really delving into the role of language, both in terms of the language that we use when we educate and try to increase understanding of pain, but also the literal words that we use and the powerful impact that those can have. And then I want to explore a couple of things that are very close to my heart, and that's sensory modulation and brain trickery, and explore the type of roles that they may play in the treatment of chronic pain, but also in our understanding of creating, new hypotheses and new ways forward. And I think by the fact that I'm talking about targeting pain in numerous different ways, it alludes to the complexity of pain. And I know I certainly felt that. I know when I was a new grad working as a physiotherapist, I used to love when I saw that I had people coming in with knee osteoarthritis, because I was like, oh, this makes sense. It's not really like back pain where we can't really figure out or know what's going on. But, with knee osteoarthritis, they go in, they get an x-ray. We have this clear reason why they have their pain. We know why they have their pain. And I distinctly remember when that illusion of understanding why they have pain shattered. And I was working as a physio, and I had a fellow coming in with knee pain, and his GP had sent him for x-rays and had asked for bilateral x-rays. So he came in and took a peek at the x-ray, and I looked at it and I thought, oh, yes, looks a little bit like the one up here, like clear osteoarthritic changes. I've got a good idea why his knee hurts. And then I realized I was looking at the wrong x-ray. It was the x-ray of his knee that had no pain. And I distinctly remember that moment being like, wait, if how much his knees hurt is not telling me anything, this imaging finding isn't really telling me anything about that, then what on earth is causing his pain? And if we look to the literature, we see that actually the experience that I had is largely supported. So if we look at completely pain-free individuals that get put into a scanner and have their knee an MRI undertaken on their knee, we find that up to 43% of people over the age of 40 actually have MRI features that are suggestive of osteoarthritis, even though they have absolutely no osteoarthritic pain. And we see similar things in back pain. If we get people who have back pain or who do not have any back pain and we get them into the scanner, what we find is for the average 30-year-old, 1 in 2 of them will have evidence of disc degeneration. 40% of them will have evidence of a disc bulge. And what's quite intriguing is if we look at people that are a little bit older, let's say 50, then disc degeneration goes up to about 80% of people, and about 60% of people without any back pain at all will have evidence of a disc bulge. So these findings here actually tend to show us that some of these changes might be quite normal that we see on scans. They might be more age-related changes, wrinkles of time, so to speak, rather than explaining or delineating a cause for pain. And this information together really challenges the assumption that bodily feelings like pain solely reflect the biological state of the tissues. They clearly don't, because otherwise what we would see is these people that have these different changes and what some consider pathological changes in the tissues, they would also have pain, but they don't. And it tells us that there's actually more to the story. There's more things involved in this complex experience of pain, because looking at a scan and expecting to understand pain is a little bit like looking at a picture taken at a family reunion and being able to say, oh, look, everybody's smiling in that picture. Must have been great. And we all know the complex dynamics that occur in something like that and realize that a picture is just a picture. And so what we're starting to understand from modern pain science is that actually our bodily experiences like pain, they're actually shaped by the credible, believable evidence that's present, and not just according to sensory information coming from that body part. There's a brilliant study that illustrates this. This is a study done by Tasha that was looking at the influence that the knowledge you have about your own body and its safety, and looking at how that influences pain. So what they did is they took healthy volunteers and they were zapping them with lasers. And what they did is they performed a skin assessment on them to ensure that that was safe for them to be zapped with lasers. So they looked at the skin and determined, oh yeah, this area, skin, totally safe, totally fine. This area, actually, no, it's not safe. We're not going to apply laser there. Oh, this area, it looks all right, but we're just going to be careful. We're just going to watch really closely. Now, the thing is it was a completely fake skin assessment. Nothing about that was real. But what it was doing was installing a belief about whether or not receiving laser to the skin was safe. And what they did is they zapped the areas that they were told were safe and they told were approved with caution, and looked at what happened to pain. And this is what they found, is when they zapped those areas where people weren't sure if it was safe, they had significantly higher pain intensity ratings. So something hurts more, even though it's the exact identical noxious stimulus. The laser zap is identical. And this seemed to be driven largely by anxiety that was produced by being unsure whether actually it was safe to receive that laser zap. But this shows us that things hurt more when you aren't sure that they're safe. When you have credible, believable evidence from someone wearing, a white lab coat telling you that it might not be safe to receive something, that is changing the way your system is processing that incoming information and results in more pain. But we're even more complex than that. We're starting to understand that the environment around us can actually have quite significant contributions to shaping a pain experience. And this study is a hilarious study, and it was looking at smells, particularly looking at disgusting smells. So in this study, they were actually looking at something called the nociceptive withdrawal reflex. This is the one that if you get you touch a hot stove, it's what causes you to pull your hand back almost before you even feel that heat pain. So what they did is they were testing this reflex and looking at the size of this nociceptive withdrawal reflex. And they had a baseline condition, and this is approximately how large or the magnitude of that reflex. Now, when they wafted in a nice pleasant smell or a neutral smell, actually that reflex didn't change very much. It stayed relatively constant. However, when they wafted in the smell of an incredibly stinky fart, look what happens to that reflex. It's upregulated, its magnitude increases. But let's just take a moment to appreciate this. A bad smell is causing literal neurophysiological upregulation of the way that you protect your body, your threat reflexes. And what's really intriguing is that actually we see similar impact of smell on the pain experience itself. So at baseline, the pain was about 4.4, but when you had a nice smell, it actually, the exact same stimulus hurt less, about 2.5 out of 10. And when you had a bad, stinky smell, it hurt more. So what this all suggests is actually that we have a dynamic system that adapts and updates based on the available information for that person in that environment within the society that they're based on. And that system is determining ultimately whether or not we need to be protected. And if we need to be protected, pain is produced because pain is a protective thing. It stops us from being silly. It requires us to get ourselves out of certain situations. But this idea of protection, it's based upon the available information. And the available information can either be safety cues or it could be danger cues. It could be things around us that are suggesting to us that we may need to be protected. Now, one thing I think that's really critical to consider is that our knowledge and understanding of pain and of our own painful conditions is a really important contributor to that need to protect. And so then I come back to this, condition that I loved as a new grad, osteoarthritis, because osteoarthritis is a really cool thing to think of in terms of this context, because there are actually very strong beliefs attached to why it hurts. And these beliefs can also either provide safety or danger cues. And I'd like to explore those a little bit more. If we look at osteoarthritis, this is beautiful qualitative research done by Sam Bunsley out of Melbourne, looking at what people with osteoarthritis believe about their osteoarthritis and their pain. And what she found was this, is that many people with osteoarthritis believe strongly that the osteoarthritis is due to wear and tear. They've worn out their joints. And they believe that they have pain because their joint is bone on bone. And as such, they often view that joint as being particularly vulnerable because it's damaged. And therefore, it's not entirely clear or doesn't really make any sense why exercise might be a good thing, because you've got this damaged, vulnerable joint. And indeed, when we look further in the qualitative literature, there's really strong beliefs often about exercise that are underpinned by this knowledge and understanding of the condition. And this is a quote from a fellow that says, it seems common sense that if you've got a deterioration in the joint, like which arthritis is, then the more you do, the more it's going to be worn, I wouldn't have thought it's something that would get better with practice, with exercise. And someone else said, if it's your bones that's grating together, causing that much pain because there's wear and tear, how is the muscles above or below going to really help? And these are incredibly valid things to think, aren't they? Because if the only reason you're having pain is because things are bone on bone, why would doing anything more be helpful? But the problem with this relates to the language we use around osteoarthritis that instill this very strong knowledge and beliefs that bone on bone is the key. And the problem with that is that it's not accurate based on new pain science in osteoarthritis. So we're starting to understand now that in people with osteoarthritis, there are functional changes to the nervous system that actually mean the system itself is overprotective. And I want to talk through some of those with you today. So, for example, we have evidence that people with knee osteoarthritis have impaired pain inhibitory function. So the normal dynamic systems that normally calm things down and work to inhibit the system, they're not working as they should. So we typically test this using a paradigm called conditioned pain modulation. So for example, doing a pressure pain threshold, pushing on the skin, seeing at what point they first feel pain, measuring that by itself, and comparing that to a pressure pain threshold when you also have another painful experience. So in this case, putting your hand in an ice cold bath. And the idea of this is that pain inhibits pain. So when you test healthy controls without pain, their pressure pain threshold is higher. So they're less sensitive when you pair these two things together than when you give just your test pressure pain threshold alone. And that's indicative of an intact inhibitory function. We don't see that in people with knee OA. So we see on average that there's about a 20% reduction in their ability of their system to inhibit. And in some, the ability to inhibit is reduced by about half. So there's problems with the brakes of the system. But what's more is there also seems that in people with knee OA, facilitation is working too well. So we often test this using something called temporal summation, where we apply a noxious stimuli to the skin and we compare how much that hurts at the start to how much that hurts at the end of 10 stimuli. And people with knee osteoarthritis, there in the dark bars there, you can see that compared first probe to the 10th, they have a much bigger ramp up, a bigger wind up of their system, such that it hurts much more than people without pain have as an experience. And what this suggests is actually that facilitation is working too well. The gas pedal, the accelerator is working too well. And indeed, if we look at pressure pain thresholds around the body, people with knee osteoarthritis, painful knee osteoarthritis, are generally more sensitive. So if we measure pressure pain thresholds at the painful knee, they have lower thresholds. They're more sensitive than healthy pain-free controls, but they're also more sensitive at the thumb as well as at the trapezius site. So that almost suggests more a global sensitization. So a sensitization more of the system itself. And we typically call this idea central sensitization. So while this might give us a hint that central sensitization is there, there's actually stronger evidence for that. And it's neuroimaging evidence showing that if you give people stimuli, so people with knee OA or hip OA, in the area of their referred pain, and then you look at how much activation they have in the brain in the pain-related areas, there's significantly more activation in people with knee OA as compared to healthy controls, despite the fact that you're using an identical physical stimulus. And what this suggests is overall, the system is actually more sensitive. Now, it's not just the nervous system. So there's growing evidence that osteoarthritis is actually likely to be a low-level inflammatory state. So I'm not going to talk through all of these different things that are going to come up on the slide, but I just want you to appreciate the different complexity of systems that are involved. And what this slide tells us actually overall is that it seems that in people with osteoarthritis, there's a shift in their inflammatory balance. Their balance is off, and it's actually a shift towards pro-inflammatory states. And pro-inflammatory states means that things hurt more. But also, a pro-inflammatory state and all of these features, they can help maintain processes like central sensitization. So we have a nervous system and an immune system that are both promoting things to be more sensitive. Now, so what we see here is that these functional changes to the neuroimmune system in people with painful OA, they're a little bit like road rage when you're hungry. So picture this, you get cut off by a car. You're not hungry. Get cut off, like you're annoyed, you're a bit mad, but you know, whatever, nothing bad happened. Now picture getting cut off when you're starving hungry. First of all, you overreact immediately to what's happening. You're yelling, you're swearing, you're so mad. But it's not even just that increase in sensitivity. Now you're at the lights and you're waiting for someone else to go and they took too long. They had one job, get moving. You're actually starting to be more sensitive to other things. And then you might even find that things that don't even involve driving are starting to ignore you and you can't stop it from getting mad. See that person standing on the side of a road like an idiot. Where is this coming from? And the trouble is you have no food in the car to help inhibit all of these overreactions. And so all of these functional changes that we see in the neuroimmune system in people with osteoarthritis, what they mean is that it's no wonder that what we see on imaging doesn't relate to how much pain people feel, because the amount of pain that people are experiencing is no longer reflecting necessarily the amount of tissue damage present, but it's reflecting these changes in the functional state of the system. And understanding this, understanding all these different processes that can be occurring is critical, because it can help make it more relevant and more not weird to think that pain in osteoarthritis might not just be because of your knees bone on bone. And challenging someone's beliefs of why they have osteoarthritis pain then also helps us give a new narrative and a new story for why things might hurt. But I think what's also really relevant is it helps explain why exercise might be something good to do, even if you have severe osteoarthritis. And so this is you are well aware of the Twin Peaks model from Dave Butler and Lorimer Moseley, but I think it's a beautiful way to conceptualize this idea. So the idea is here that this mountain is activity, and at a certain amount of activity, you can hurt yourself. You can breach your tissue capacity. But what's important is that actually we all have a protect by pain line in terms of the amount of activity that we do that occurs before we reach tissue capacity. We all have a safety buffer. And this is to stop us from getting injured. It's adaptive. That's the point of pain, is to stop us from being injured, to tell us about it before there's a problem. Now, after injury, of course, tissue capacity does reduce, and it would take less, movement or effort to re-injure yourself. But with all the processes that go on, the protect by pain line actually comes down much lower. We have a much bigger safety buffer. And this is entirely adaptive. This is what we want, because the safety buffer basically stops us from being stupid, injuring ourselves again. But typically, tissue capacity increases. But in some cases, the safety buffer, it stays where it is. And so what we're actually getting is a system itself becomes overprotective. And in the case of people with osteoarthritis, many of these things that I've just spoken about, this lack of inhibition, facilitation's working too well, these immune changes, inflammatory state, these are things that can maintain an overprotective safety buffer. As well, it can also be the state and the functional state of the system can be maintained by things like beliefs, fear, anxiety, sleep. But what's critical, though, is if we have an understanding of that, then we can understand that when we start to move and we're a bit sore, like, it's actually okay because we're safe. We're nowhere near the tissue capacity. We're not making more damage or hurting bone on bone even more. And this can then help to engage in activity. And we know that when we slowly engage in activity, typically this safety buffer starts to become less, and we become more tolerant in different activities. And indeed, there is evidence that this is from chronic back pain, but that if we increase knowledge and understanding of pain and combine it with activity, it appears to be effective. So targeting language through appropriate understanding of a condition has important effects on function and also on pain intensity. And we're actually in the process of testing this in a clinical trial in people with knee osteoarthritis. So stay tuned for those results. But I think in addition to the importance of language that we use in terms of education, I think it's also really important to understand how important our words are. They really matter. And I want to give you an example of this, of how words can powerfully shape what we experience. So I'm going to show you a video. And in this video, there's going to be, you see a girl standing there, and there will be different words that come up on either side of her. I want you to look at the word to the left, read it to yourself, and then you're going to hear something. And what I want you to do is try reading the word on the left-hand side of the screen, and then pay attention to what word you hear. So here we go. Now pay attention to the word on the right. So what you will notice here, and I'll play it again in case you missed it, but you will only hear the word that you're reading. So try this again. Say green needle, green needle. Now, brainstorm, brainstorm. It's incredible the degree to which the words that we hear, the information that we have, actually shapes our experience of something. And I think this makes it really important for us as clinicians to really think about the words we use when we talk to people with pain. So as an example, we often hear things like this. You got the knee of an 80-year-old, which is like a compliment if they're 95, but if they're 50, that's not great to hear. But this is the worst x-ray I've ever seen. Your joints wear out as you get older. Better get used to it. This will be here for the rest of your life. Bone on bone, degeneration, wear and tear. All of these things provide a message that your joints are stuffed. It's just going to get worse. Be careful how much you do. And these provide critical danger cues that can shift the balance of our dynamic system. Whereas instead, what we want to be doing is giving safety cues. And this might include things like, these scan changes are about what I would expect. Think of them a little bit like wrinkles. They do not determine what you're capable of. But in addition, we're all bioplastic. And what that means is our systems can always adapt and change, and right up to the very end, right up till our last breath. We also might use words related to movement, or things like stop if you feel any pain. Your jogging days are over. Be very careful when you do that movement. And we're giving this message that movement is bad and really could injure you further, and giving and attaching danger cues to movement, when perhaps what we want to do is to promote safety cues. So for example, movement might be a little bit painful like at first. It's a little bit, think about a sprained ankle, but it gets better as you get active. And our tissues actually adapt best through loading. So slowly increasing your walking is one of the best things you can do. Your knee, it's strong, it's robust. Let's take it out for a test drive. But all these things, what I love about it is that they can powerfully influence the balance of safety and danger for an individual person. And they're often things that we might incidentally say without thinking about them too much, but that helping people to reshape, first of all, their understanding of the condition, but also support that with the words we use, and critically, the words they use to describe their own painful knee are critical. So for the rest of the session, I'm going to do a little bit of a switch and now talk about some sensory modulation, because I've kind of introduced this idea that words and beliefs can powerfully influence our perceptions and what we experience. But actually, so can sensory input. So things like visual cues or auditory cues can powerfully shape what we experience. And this is because incoming information, so sensory input that comes into us, it actually undergoes like enormous amounts of filtering, integrating, prioritizing before it ever enters our conscious awareness. So there's a lot of things going on that we're not even aware of. And what's important is that we're starting to understand that as part of these processes, there's actually innate sensory processes where information from one sensory source can modulate or change information from another. So an example is actually visual input and nociception and the resultant experience of pain. So in experimental pain studies, what we've seen is that vision of our body itself and of the size of our body that we see, it actually can powerfully modulate the pain experience. Particularly sometimes if things look bigger than they truly are, it's often analgesic. And so I've been really interested to see if kind of these innate systems that seem to exist in healthy volunteers and with experimental pain might also exist and be present in people with chronic pain. And so in people with osteoarthritis, I've explored this idea of using vision to change the size of a joint. So you're seeing it bigger or different than it truly is. So in people with knee osteoarthritis, I looked at the impact of an illusion that changed the size of their knee. This is showing a stretch illusion. And we used what's called mediated reality. And it's real-time video, but we can manipulate it. So what's cool is like you're seeing yourself doing things, but we're changing it in front of your eyes. So I'm going to show you a video of what this illusion looked like. What you're going to see is as if your leg is straight out in front of you and you're looking down at the top of your kneecap. So you'll see in this video here, there's your kneecap. As it visually elongates, we pull on the calf muscle at the same time. And it gives your brain believable, credible evidence that it's actually changing size. And of course, you consciously know it isn't, but your brain responds like it is. And so what we did is we took people who had painful knee osteoarthritis and we did this illusion, but we also did lots of different control conditions. And we didn't tell them what the real one was, and we did this all in a randomized order. And this is what we found, is that when we did the real illusion, there was a significant reduction in their pains. This is just after one illusion. And this reduction did not occur when we just pulled on their leg. There was no effect on pain. And there was no reduction in pain when we just visually changed the size of their knee and their leg. And so what this suggests is actually that having these illusions that change your perceived size of your leg, they seem to modulate the experience of pain. And it suggests that these innate sensory processes might be intact in people with knee osteoarthritis. And that gets quite exciting because maybe we can then use them to our advantage in treatments. Now, one thing that was quite cool when we were doing this study is we had one participant who he often had intermittent knee swelling as one of his primary symptoms. And what we noticed when we did these is that these illusions drastically modulated and changed his swelling of his knee. So we were, well, it kind of freaked me out at first, to be honest, but then I asked him if he didn't mind coming back so we could test it further. And that's what we did. So what we found in this fellow is that we measured the swelling of his knee by using a circumferential measure around his leg. And I'm just going to take your attention to this top part here. But this is the black bar there. That is the baseline condition. That's how wide his knee was around in the baseline condition. And then what we did is we did the stretch illusion with him, but we repeated it lots of times in a row and had him watch it. And he had a significant, you can see quite a decent increase in the swelling of his knee. And then we did the stretch illusion and sustained it. So we just had him look at his knee in that stretched out stage, and the swelling increased even more. And then I really didn't want to send him home with a really swollen knee. So I tried to do another illusion where I made his entire limb look very small. And actually, when we sustained that and he viewed that, it actually did reduce his swelling. Now, I needed to be sure of this, so I asked him if he minded coming back again so we could see if we could replicate this, and we could. So when he came back the next time, again, the baseline condition, when we did the repeated stretch illusion, again, an increase in swelling. And when we did the sustained small knee, but we kept it, had him look at that small knee and leg for a while, swelling reduced. So this is quite cool because it's suggesting that not only is there, these innate sensory processes that seem to modulate pain, but they also seem to modulate kind of our physiological regulation of that body part, the swelling that is induced or reduced based on the condition. So to me, what this highlights is that there could be, quite significant potential of some of these things that we may not have realized. And so the other area that I've been quite interested in is exploring the impact that vision has, but when we do more nuanced visual changes, most particularly looking at changing color. Now, the basis for this comes from some experimental studies, and they found that if you touch someone on the skin with a really cold probe that hurts, it actually hurts less if you shine a blue light than if you shine a red light. And we were interested in testing this idea of the influence of blue. And we thought actually a really relevant condition to look at this in is people with a condition called burning mouth syndrome. So in these people, it's a quite rare condition, but can be incredibly debilitating and resistant to treatment. And they have burning pain, often in their tongue and oral mucosa. We were interested. So if we have this nice blue, calming, cool looking visual illusion, is that possible that it might reduce their burning pain? So we use the same mediated reality type system. So people had a camera facing their tongue. They could see their tongue moving around, it moved with them. And what we did is we turned it blue. And we looked at when they have this blue tongue, they're moving it around, what happens to their pain? And what we found is actually that having a blue tongue significantly reduces their pain. That dark line there, the black line there, is actually the group average. And these are all individual participants, but there was a significant reduction in pain. And this reduction didn't occur when we made the tongue small, and it didn't occur when we basically made things not match up for them. But it raises the possibility that particularly in these conditions that we don't really understand very well, we might have the ability to kind of target them from different areas by using some of these sensory modulatory processes. So in addition to looking at vision and its role, we're also understanding that the auditory system has a lot of links with different sensory systems like touch and pressure, as well as different links with the motor system. And so in the recent bit, I've been really interested in auditory cues and understanding how that might shape our perceptions. And the study that I was actually particularly interested in, it was looking at this idea of stiffness, because stiff joints often make a lot of noises. So auditory cues have ecological validity when you look at them in this context. And so what I was interested in is I took people who had chronic back pain and feelings of chronic back stiffness. And I wondered, what if I gave them the sound of an incredibly creaky door, and I paired that with pressure applied to their back? What would happen to how their back felt? Would it feel more stiff? This is what the setup looked like. They're laying on their tummy, pressing in, and then they hear this horrible creaking sound that actually occurred as well as the probe came back up. And what we did is we applied that a bunch of times, and we had people give us measures of their perception of their back. And this is what we found. So what I'm going to show you here is anything that, looking here, that's the correlate of feeling more stiff, and anything here is feeling less stiff. But what we did is we looked at the type of sound. So we either compared that creaking sound paired with indents 3 times, or we looked at a more gentle whooshing sound that kind of gave you that sense of nice, easy movement. And we looked at what it happened to how their back felt. And so this is healthy controls on the left and people with back pain and back stiffness on the right. And you can see in both groups, having that creaky noise paired with pressure on their back increased those feelings of back stiffness, this correlative of feeling more stiff. And we see something very different when we have that nice whooshing control sound. So people with back pain, particularly, you can see there, their back felt much less stiff when they had that nice whooshing sound. So it suggests that actually the auditory cues, the sound that's paired to things going on with our body, can really change how we perceive that body part. And it suggests that some of these innate processes are intact in people with back pain. We also wanted to manipulate the meaning of the sound. And to do this, we used that creaky sound, and we used an identical sound, but we made it less creaky over time. So kind of like if you think of a really creaky gate, you're oiling it so it gets less and less creaky. So this is the creaky data that I just showed you before. And what we found is, despite it being an identical sound, but just less volume, so less creaky, we found very, very different things in terms of what that induced in terms of the perception of their own backs. So I'm just going to highlight, particularly for people with back pain, that third indentation. You can see when it was the creaky sound, they felt more stiff. However, if it's a creaky decrease, so it's not sounding very stiff at that point, they feel less stiff. So to me, this gives us nice information that it's not just about pairing sound to something, that we take meaning from what those sound touch pairings are, and this modulates our experience. And maybe we can start to use these sort of things to help in varying conditions that experience feelings of stiffness. Now, one of the other things I just want to share quickly is some recent work by one of my honor students, Anna Stanton, who is looking at people who had an amputation and had phantom limb pain. And this was really interesting because we were looking at what happens when we replace a missing limb. And we used our similar mediated reality setup where you flip, what we did is you have the real-time video and you take the video of the intact limb and you flip it over onto the missing limb. So it now looks like they have two limbs. And then we had them move their intact limb. But we delayed the video that we flipped over onto the other side, so now they can do a walking pattern. And we were interested in the influence of auditory input to what kind of occurred during this experience. So this is what the illusion looked like. So you can see the walking, and so this is in the fellow you just saw. And in this case, you'll notice that his right intact limb is touching the ground. So he hears the auditory sound and has tactile feedback of it touching the ground. But that auditory and tactile input is missing on the other side. And what was intriguing is when that was missing, that lack of expected auditory and tactile cues, it actually induced phantom limb telescoping. And what telescoping is when you suddenly have a feeling that almost the end of the phantom limb is being drawn up into the stump. So because you would expect to hear something and feel something when you're touching the ground, when that's not present, to make sense of it, your brain, in this case, shifts the perception of your body itself, the phantom limb. But this could be relevant because actually, when people have telescoped limbs, it can be detrimental to treatment. So they don't respond actually as well. So maybe, could we start to add auditory cues during things like illusory walking to reverse telescoping and potentially help improve treatment outcome in people? The last thing that I want to talk about with auditory cues and using them to our advantage is this idea that actually we really don't use them with very many different things, despite the fact that actually they can have large influences on our perception. So I recently did a review collaborating with Charles Spence, and we found that adding auditory cues to things influences our perception of our own body, of the surfaces that we touch, the movements that we do, how much force we think we have, things about our body, how much we weigh. And all of these things could actually have really relevant impacts to people that have pain. So if we can do an illusion that makes you feel like you're less heavy, does that help someone who has foot pain when they're walking? And we also see really interesting things in terms of sound and performance. So if you take hammer throwers and you take the sound that's related to their very best performance, and then you give it to them and you get them to throw, do the hammer throw with that sound, they throw farther and it standardizes their motor performance. And so I wonder whether we might be able to use some of these things in people with pain to actually help with movement, or even people that have undergone stroke. Can we use some of these auditory cues to help re-establish motor performance? Now, the very last thing that I'm going to talk about here today is brain trickery. You might have thought I was already speaking about brain trickery, but here what I want to do is I want to talk about things that we don't know the implications of these yet, but I think expanding and considering different things that are occurring in some of the basic literature can be really helpful in us creating hypotheses and moving forward in terms of our understanding of pain, but also how we might create new treatments. Now, the first one that I want to talk about, it's in relation to how we frame the way that pain influences our own performance, because it really might matter. So this is a study that was looking at, they got people doing a counting task. And in one group, they gave them kind of a negative framing of the impact of pain. So they said pain disrupts cognitive processes like visual processing and memory, clearly processes that you're going to use in the task. And when they primed people with this, they then had that group do that task under two conditions. One where they felt pain, so they had an experimental pain type paradigm, and one where it was pain-free. And indeed, when they were primed with this idea that pain disrupts cognitive processes, they do worse on the task than when they perform the task pain-free. But this is the interesting bit. They had a positive group where they said, actually, pain enhances cognitive processes in many ways, like visual processing and memory. that you will be using on this task. And they had the same conditions, but they saw the complete opposite thing. So in this case, when you positively primed people, actually when they felt pain during the task, they did better. Their performance was better than when they were pain-free. And to me, this provides lovely fodder to consider how we might be talking about the influence of pain on things with our patients, because are we negatively priming them, or do we have the opportunity to positively prime them? Now, the second brain trickery thing that I want to talk to you about is eye gaze shenanigans. This is amazing. I love this stuff. And this is a study that basically shows that your decisions can be biased without you being even aware of it, based on what your body is doing. In this case, what your eye gaze is doing. So in this study, they gave people kind of a moral dilemma. Murder is sometimes justifiable. And they had a scale that rated from sometimes justifiable to never justifiable. And what they found is so when people were making their decisions, their eye gaze tracked their decision-making process, which that kind of makes sense. But what was the coolest bit is that they were able to basically bias people's decisions towards one of those answers merely by waiting until their gaze was on one side and then presenting them with the need to choose a response. So literally, we can be biased into choosing something merely because it's been shown while we're gazing at that option. And what's intriguing to me is I wonder, how many times do you think we've asked the question at the wrong time when people maybe were considering exercising with pain is sometimes justified, sometimes justifiable, never justifiable. Have we asked it at the wrong time and biased responses? Now, clearly that's completely speculative, but I love that type of thinking of where we might be able to take it. And if we can understand this further, how we can use that in clinical situations. Now, the very last thing I want to look at in terms of brain trickery is just raise the possibility that we understand less about the impact of sensory incongruence than we think. So we've recently, this is work from my master's student, Brendan Mowat, who was working to create a virtual reality bike. So you're actually biking and it's going along. But what we did is we manipulated and messed with whether what you saw, those hills, actually corresponded to what you were doing. Now, I can't give you too many details because this is just going in, but what I want to say is that it seems to matter. And it seems to matter specific to an individual. So if you are very aware of your own body, the ability of things around you to influence you is very different than if you're not aware of your own body. And I think that has real implications for many pain conditions in which body awareness is sometimes disrupted. So on that note, I'd like to summarize my talk here. And really that's my message, is that pain is there to protect. It doesn't necessarily tell us about damage. And this often means that searching for the one peripheral cause, it's not fruitful. But critically, our systems can become overprotective. And even more critically is that this overprotection is malleable. And language is critically important. Our words matter hugely, as does our ability to educate people about pain and about their condition. Intriguingly, there are many innate sensory modulatory processes that we might be able to use to our advantage when we're treating people in pain. And that these brain trickery things, they're food for thought. And they provide, I think, unique hypotheses about pain and bodily states and might help direct future treatment. So on that note, I want to thank you so much for your time. And I very much look forward to taking some questions from you and meeting up with you afterwards. Thank you.